Thank you. We can start. Thank you very much, everybody, for giving us this Saturday. It's very important for us to have those online as well. So thank you for everybody who's joining us at the moment. So there's a large audience online as well. As you know, this Saturday is at the eve of the World Health Assembly, which starts tomorrow on Sunday afternoon. And it's an important session for us to start aligning ourselves as to what to say to the high-level policymakers who will be with us over the next week. The session will start opening. We're looking at the critical need of patient partnerships in medicines and health devices regulations. As you know, health technology is advancing at quite a speed. Many of you would remember the graphics that shows that in days gone by, the human knowledge used to double slowly. You know, it was like every 500 years, 100 years, it came to 50 years, and then it started rapidly escalating. Now, total human knowledge doubles almost in 20 days. I think the type of papers that are coming in. So there is an issue about that health technology that we have and controlling it, making sure it's safe for everybody to use, and the regulators come into that. So that's where the session comes in. How can we be not only the recipient of this health technology, but also have oversight? I'm so glad here we have our moderator, our previous board member, Karen Villanueva, who is from PAPO, which is the Patient Alliance of Patient Organizations in Asia Pacific and Philippines, and she's the president there. Next, I think one of a long-standing relationship has been with the Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences, CIOMS. We've got Dr. Lembit Rägo, and we participated in a landmark report produced by CIOMS on patient engagement in medicines development. And please do access that report. So it's really fresh out there to be looked at online. Then our close friend, Janis Bernat, who has been the Director of Scientific and Regulatory Affairs at the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association, IFPMA. And I think we have, during the pandemic and pre-pandemic as well, started developing that great relationship between patient organizations and industry and regulators. And that's a model now being suggested in Europe as well. EMA has been saying that both industry and the European network, HTA EU network, to work closely together and come up with proposals which show how the industry has engaged patient organizations within the development of medicines. At this time, it's almost what they call the burden shifts, in that if an industry partner submits an application for a new health technology, the issue there is that the regulator will look at how patients were engaged. And it makes good sense then to have patient engagement quite at the early stages. Then we have Dr. Maria Mavris, who's a Public and Stakeholder Engagement Department at the European Medicines Agency. And as you know, the European Medicines Agency has been driving patient participation through its various structures, agencies, and programs. And last, we have got Maria Valentin, who is a Technical Officer for Regulatory Convergence and Networks at the WHO. I will now give over the floor to Karen Villanueva, who is our moderator for this session. Karen, over to you. And Karen is very expert on this because she's been working within the APAC region and maybe this time in India when they have the international ICDRA, International Conference of Drug Regulatory Authorities. She will be an active member, but she was at APEC when the regulatory affairs are discussed. Karen?
Thank you so much, Kawaldeep. Good evening. Welcome back to the Secretary of the Global Patient Congress. Patient partnership. We have a very insightful. We'll have a very insightful session this morning, and it's really about patient partnerships in medicines and health devices regulation. And we saw that during the pandemic, the value of regulatory reliance and early and thorough regulatory approval of innovative and repurposed medicines was very critical. And this required a whole of government, industry, and patient community partnership with each of our national medicines regulatory authorities. The best outcomes were achieved in regions where new agilities were developed and innovative medicines regulatory pathways created by national and regional regulators. So today we have a very distinguished panel of experts who will share not just their knowledge, but their body of work in terms of the research and the various experiences and expertise that they have. So allow me to first call on our first speaker. Each of our speakers will have 7 minutes, so pardon us in advance if we need to cut you, because I think the value of these sessions are really in the question and answer, and we're really here for our audience globally. Many, including my colleagues in the Philippines and in ASEAN, are really looking forward to the learnings because, as you know, we're still in the process of having our regulatory framework among ASEAN signed by the ministers. So this is a really important session for all of us. So our first speaker is Secretary General for the Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Lembit Rägo. The floor is yours, Dr. Rägo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would do a bit distance from here, the presentation. So my short presentation is insights on the research and publication of patient involvement in the development, regulation, and safe use of medicines. Next one, please. First, couple of words about CIOMS. CIOMS stands for Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences. It was founded in 1949 by WHO and UNESCO, and it's in official relations with WHO. It's UNESCO associated partner, and it's also ISAGE observer since 2016. And its mission is to advance public health through guidance on health research, including ethics, medical product development, and safety. And below you have the panel of the variety of publications we have had, and we have focused in recent years in 3 areas. First is bioethics, then it's the safety of medicines, which is pharmacovigilance, and then also product development. Next one, please. In 2018, we started our Working Group 11, which was called Patient Involvement in the Development, Regulation, and Safe Use of Medicines. And the objective was to discuss benefits of patient involvement during the whole life cycle of a medicine, from early development through regulatory process and post-marketing use until potential retirement. So it's a life cycle approach from the very early beginning to the end. And the composition of the working group was international, with the involvement of patient representatives from different organizations, including JAPO, and also representatives from regulators, including US FDA and European Medicines Agency, and some others, industry, many companies, and also academia and international and national organizations, including WHO. So it was a transparent process. We did also some interim meetings to extend the access to the patient organizations. One was held in Geneva, and one was held in Africa, in Kampala, to try to get more input, because you never can have everybody in the working group. And the report, with 11 chapters, was issued in 2022. It's a public good, so anybody can download it from our website, and that's the copy, hard copy. So next one, please. This is the composition of this very extensive report. It's 236 pages. It has, starting from the ethical considerations for patient involvement, because it's an ethical also aspect of that, for executive summary, chapters of introduction, landscape, guiding principles, how best to involve patient organizations, what are the guiding principles, and then going to the more specific, advancing new treatments, use of real-world data and evidence, product labeling, rapid safety communication, additional risk minimization, clinical practice guideline, it's already post-authorization, and also separate chapters on low and middle income countries and pandemic considerations. It has also appendices. Next one. The appendices are really trying to give the flavor of the real life, what has happened, what are the positive experiences. And there are a lot of positive experiences, and some of these case studies are putting forward different aspects where patients' voice and involvement was critical to improve the treatment, the access, or critical also to change the formulation to the more friendly to the patient formulation. So these are all in the appendixes, and we have also very extensive glossary, which many parties have found very useful. Next one, please. So this is chapter 4, which is one of the key chapters of the report, Advancing Treatments. And each chapter has also key points in advance, and one of the key points really is that patient participation is needed in planning, testing, reviewing, approving, and monitoring treatments throughout the life cycle of medicines. So it's nowadays really a vital component of development of any medicine. Next one, please. So this is just a slide which we are very grateful for the European Medicines Agency, because they created it for us, the infographics. It actually shows that European Medicines Agency's process involves in practically all steps advisory committees which involve patient representatives. And in most of these advisory committees, patient representatives nowadays have full voice. They have on equal basis with the other members of the committee. In some other smaller amount of committees, they don't have it yet, but it's a very good move towards the very mature involvement of patients in the medicines agency processes. And this is, of course, a very good example for other emerging regulators, that they could also learn how to better involve patients. Next one, please. So then, what to say as a conclusion? The CIOMS working group report is really a unique resource. There are many other sources, but there is no one who has such a comprehensive life cycle approach. It's a comprehensive reference that represents worldwide perspectives. It's a pragmatic best practice guidance with examples and links to further reading also. It's a lot of references, and in the electronic copy you have hyperlinks, so you can click and you can get very quickly what you need. And the recommendations are that the reader should select those best practices that fit with their current organizational needs. There is a lot. Patients' engagement should be non-tokenistic, because that's a bit sometimes happening. It's not just for appearance sake. It's not just for the beauty. It's for the content. And that's the most important. And third, no one-size-fits-all approach. The report recommendations require nuanced interpretation according to the circumstances globally, because the differences are really still there, and they are quite big, unfortunately, because US, Europe, a bit Japan, some other countries are going ahead. And in other countries, patients' involvement, especially in regulatory processes, virtually absent. So it's still a long, long way for some countries. So then, and you need to take, step by step. And then, of course, it is that sharing the lessons learned will advance patient involvement further. Yes, we have achieved a lot, but it's not the end of the story. Also, this report is not the end of the story. But it's the very good starting point, it's a very good reference point, and we need all very much efforts collectively with all stakeholders to mature the patient involvement further for the benefits of all stakeholders and first of all, of course, patients. Thank you. So just as a remark, it's a quite heavy report. I have 6 copies, the same copies with me, so if somebody wants to have a hard copy, we're running actually out of them. So you can get them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lembit. May I reserve 1 copy?
Yes, please.
Thank you. That's the advantage of being the moderator. Later, you had a very interesting talk, and I myself have questions, but later we will tackle those questions. But thank you very much for sharing your work. Our next speaker is from the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association, IFPMA. She's the Director for Scientific and Regulatory Affairs. I'd like to welcome Ms. Janis Bernat. Morning, Janis. Over to you.
Good morning and thank you, and hello to everybody online. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about regulatory reliance, and I'm watching what I'm saying because there are some people on the panel like Dr. Rägo and Dr. Valentin who know more about this than I do, but I'm sure they'll correct anything that's wrong. So there are various needs why we need to look at the use of regulatory reliance. You may recall yesterday during the panel discussion that a lot of activities, even in high-income countries, there's a need for looking at how we can work a little bit smarter with regards to regulation, and you can see on the slide that there are various reasons for this. And I just wanted to mention that one of the issues out there is the fact that if you make a post-approval change to a product, and this is actually something that happens after the product is on the market, could be a safety update, etc. We've looked at it, it takes 4 to 6 years to get that change approved globally. And we think that's a bit of a delay that's out there for patients. So we really want to encourage a regulatory reliance as an industry. Next slide, please. So what is regulatory reliance? And this is a definition that the World Health Organization has put together. It's really an act whereby regulatory authority in one jurisdiction takes into account and gives significant weight to assessments performed by another regulatory authority. I think what's important to remember about regulatory reliance is it's the decision of the relying national regulatory authority to decide where and when in the process they want to rely. So it's not an abdication of responsibility for their patients at the local level. I think that's really important. And reliance can happen anywhere in the process. Next slide, please. It can be either focused on taking into account good manufacturing practice inspection reports, public assessment reports, or it could be work sharing, working together as regulatory authorities, or it could be all the way to what they call mutual recognition, which is where an authority has made an approval, and because you trust that authority, then you have a very abridged and a streamlined process to get the product into your country. Next slide, please. As Lembit mentioned about the life cycle of medicine from the early phase R&D all the way to post-marketing, that is where reliance can be applied, anywhere in that process, and you can see that on this slide. So reliance cannot be applied, though, to some of those local, in-country, and national level activities, and some of those would be like adverse event reporting and approval of locally manufactured products, because that's actually in country. But when it comes to anything outside of that, whether it's laboratory testing, lot release, registration, reliance can be included in there. And that allows national regulatory authorities to free up resources and to focus on these local activities. Next slide, please. There are important enablers for regulatory reliance. Oop. I think can we go back one? One slide, please. We're missing a slide. Okay. Well, there is some, let's go forward to the stakeholders one. Excuse me, go forward one slide. Okay. So we want to talk a little bit about the role of stakeholders in regulatory reliance. And I think this slide really just shows that regulatory reliance is not just for the regulators. If there is an opportunity and there is a possibility for everybody to be involved in regulatory reliance. First of all, international organizations, the World Health Organization is really putting on a push for the use of regulatory reliance with national regulatory authorities. They do training workshops, they have meetings, they talk about how regulatory reliance can be applied. You have the role of governments, you need that government support, that Ministry of Health saying it's okay for our national regulatory authority to do reliance. You have influencers. You also have other organizations, and I think maybe the most important organization should be patients, because this reliance is for patients. It's for medicines. And I think there's a real opportunity for everybody to get involved. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a slide we were supposed to have before. So this is actually overview of enablers of regulatory reliance. These are those elements that have to be in place for regulatory reliance to work. First of all, you have to trust the national regulatory authority that you're going to rely on. That's part and parcel of this. That's really important. You also need to have the same guidance. You need to work towards convergence in your regulations, because you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, to really simplify the metaphor here. And I think this is just something that we really need to get out there, and information sharing is also very important. We need to know that the information being shared is the same for you as it is for me. Next slide, please. So just real briefly, as IFPMA, we do have a regulatory reliance task force. So we are focusing on regulatory reliance. We're trying to engage with those national regulatory authorities, trying to engage with the WHO on this topic, because as users of reliance processes, we think there's a great opportunity to provide some feedback. Next slide, please. And I think this is just to highlight the role for patients. Regulatory reliance can be used to accelerate access to medicines, whether this is cell and gene therapies, advanced therapies, whether it's vaccines, like we saw during the pandemic, or medicines in general. It's really for the patients, and we really encourage patients to become involved. Next slide, please. And these are also just highlighting some of the advantages and the impact of regulatory reliance, and how there are best practices to focus on it, and how it can have efficient utilization of resources. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we really just want to talk about the fact that, we've seen the acceleration to innovative medicines that regulatory reliance can bring. We think that having better patient engagement will help foster implementation of regulatory reliance. And we really think that co-creation towards reliance is very important and key moving forward. I have 2 more slides. Next, please. Just want to highlight that we are working with IAPA to set up a webinar on the topic of reliance. We're aiming for September. And this will be something that we hope you will join. It will be virtual, and we'll have a good discussion. Next slide, please. And then also, as IFPMA, we do set up regular regulatory conferences, and we will have one fully virtual focusing on Africa in September, and we will share that information with you when it comes available. Next slide, please. And the last one is just a QR code. Again, if you have any questions, do let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janis. We'll reserve the questions later. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. So we're also joined by two panelists virtually. It's my pleasure to welcome our second speaker for today, a third speaker for today. She is Dr. Maria Mavris. She is with the Stakeholder and Communications Division of the European Medicines Agency. Over to you, Dr. Maria Mavris.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Very well, thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you very much for the invitation, and apologies I can't be there in person. It's my pleasure to speak to you all today. So if I could have the slides. Thank you. So I will go to the next slide. That's already been explained that I work in a public and stakeholders engagement department where we work not only with patients but also with healthcare professionals. And so I'm going to talk to you just in a couple of slides about the European Medicines Agency, who we are. So we work with experts from all across Europe, and our work would not be possible without these experts who make up the 7 scientific committees. I apologize here for the acronyms, but we have the Human Medicines Committee, the Veterinary Medicines, the Orphan, the Herbal Medicines, Pediatric, Advanced Therapies, and the PRAC, which is the Safety Committee. We also have a management board, which is represented by the 27 EU member states, and also has civil society representatives who are 2 patient members, 1 member representing doctors, and 1 veterinarian. And of course, within the 4,000 scientific experts, we also have patients as well, and this is supported by a staff of approximately 800 members. So in the next slide, you'll see also what we do. And in this slide, it's very much the work of any medicines agency, which is to facilitate development and access to medicines, evaluating applications for marketing authorization, and then continuing to monitor the safety of medicines across their life cycle, so even once they're on the market. And of course, the important provision of reliable information on human and veterinary medicines to patients and healthcare professionals. But more specifically, in the next slide, I talked to you a little bit about the evolution of how the interactions and engagement with patients and consumers started and how it's evolved. So here there's really some landmark events, and starting from the creation of the Medicines Agency in 1995, really patients knocked on the door almost immediately and said, you know, you need to interact with us. And in the year 2000, we had patients that joined the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products, so the committee that evaluates medicines for rare diseases. And patients became full members of the committee with full voting rights as any other member. And so they've had now 23 years of experience of having patients as voting members. And every subsequent legislation included patients as members of committees. So then we had the Pediatric Committee, the Advanced Therapy Committee, and the last committee to be created now more than 10 years ago, which is the Safety Committee of the PRAC, all have patients as members of the committees. In 2005, we created a framework to really formalize the interaction with patients and their organizations. And from this framework emerged a unique platform called the Patients and Consumers Working Party, which meets 3 to 4 times a year. We have a dedicated public engagement department. And then we have always evolved different methodologies as well to keep including patients and engaging patients and hearing their voice all through the regulatory process, such as public hearings and involvement of young people. And of course, with the pandemic, we had to also look at patient engagement and crisis management. So this has been a long journey, and it's constantly evolving. We're always looking at different mechanisms and methodologies to engage the patient voice in medicines regulation. In the next slide, and I thank Dr. Rägo for already introducing this slide, we have the regulatory life cycle of a medicine, and it's the different phases: pre-submission, evaluation, post-authorization. Below this, we have the different activities that are associated with the committees that act at these different phases. And of course, this is a very simplified version of the regulatory life cycle. But what you can see with the little icons, as Dr. Rägo kindly explained already, is the involvement of patients, the engagement of patients patients in different activities. So either they're there as members of committees, or they can be consulted by the committees. They review documents, and they are members of, they can also be involved in expert scientific groups as well. So again, it's been a process, it's been an evolution, and it's a constantly evolving methodology. In the next slide, I just tell you a little bit about the different methodologies. And again, to quote Dr. Rägo, one size does not fit all. So we use sometimes a combination of different methodologies. We have face-to-face meetings. We also consult patients in writing. It's also very important to train and support the patients so they know exactly, they understand the regulatory process and what their role is. And we have lots of different mechanisms for supporting, including also a training day, an annual training day that we have. But now more and more, we're also using online webinars to continue with the training. In the next slide, I just want to touch upon one of the questions that's often asked to us, which is what is the added value and the impact of involving patients? And here I've just quoted 4 different activities. One is patient involvement in scientific advice, where we published a paper at the beginning of last year. It was a 4-year study on patient involvement in scientific advice and the impact of their contributions. And this has been quantified and demonstrated. In about 20% of the cases, the patients were able to change the advice that was given to the developers and to change the clinical trial protocol. And in more than 85% of cases, the patients actually agreed with the development plan. So this was very nice study to do. We also have implemented an early contact with patient organizations with the CHMP at day 1 of marketing authorization. And this was positive impact. It's now an ongoing new integrated methodology. Patients review documents and their comments are taken on board, and even the template of the documents that are destined for the public has been changed. And also patients are involved in public hearings and contribute to the recommendations that are issued by the safety committee. In the next slide, I show you that this is also not very always straightforward. It's important to find the right patients. In Europe, we have 24 official languages, and so language is an issue. Also, the availability of the patient, because being a patient is not a career. It's actually something you do in addition to looking after your family and working. We need to make sure that people understand where they're involved and why, and to understand what their role is. Managing conflicts of interest is an important aspect, and also representativeness. Is one person enough to speak for the whole community? So just to finish up in my next slide, I also want to tell you that, as I mentioned earlier, the EMA does not act in isolation. It's part of a regulatory network that's very important and involves all the regulatory agencies across Europe. And in the next slide, I also tell you that we interact internationally as well. This is very important because we have different mechanisms. We have confidentiality agreements and memorandum of understanding in place with Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, Switzerland, United States, to name a few. We also, and here actually I had updated the slides also to say that we also interact extensively with the World Health Organization, who you will hear from next. We talk a lot with the US FDA, with regular cluster meetings on all topics, including patient engagement. And of course, now with the upcoming creation of the African Medicines Agency project, that the EMA is also happy and supporting the work of the AMA and providing the EMA is a model for this, because we've also had many different countries, member states involved in creation of a common agency. So with this, I'll go to my next slide and conclude that the benefits of engaging with patients and their organizations brings the everyday aspects of living with the disease into scientific discussions. It bridges the gap of clinical data and real-world data, and hopefully increases transparency, awareness of the processes, and trust. It has to be mutually beneficial. For us, it's been a very stepwise 28-year program that's constantly still evolving, and we're learning from each other. And as I said, it really has to have meaningful outcomes for both the patients and also into the regulatory outcomes. So I thank you very much and end my presentation there.
Thank you, Dr. Maria Mavris. We certainly learned a lot from the European Medicines Agency experience and how you're actually leading the way for the rest of the world. And I hope that you're also talking to the ASEAN regulatory authorities so that we also advance patient involvement in these processes. Finally, but certainly not the least, we have our technical officer from the Regulatory Convergence and Networks team of the World Health Organization. I'd like to welcome Marie Valentin. Over to you, Marie. Marie. Can we set up her slides? So Marie will talk to us about the importance of WHO in global oversight on regulatory affairs and convergence, harmonization, and the role of the International Conference of Drug Regulatory Agencies.
Manish, Mumbai. The connections with Marie.
Yes, no, I can. Can you hear me well?
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
please.
Yes.
Welcome.
Good day to you all. Many thanks to the organizer for the invitation for this very important conference regarding the patient voice in regulatory oversight decision. So if we move to the, there was one slide before this one, please. Yes. So we know that medical products are key instrument for public health. And if we look at the United Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 3, Target 3.8, which is to achieve universal health coverage and also to have access to quality essential healthcare services and to access to safe, effective, quality and affordable essential medicine and vaccines for all. Next slide, please. So good health is impossible without access to medical products. Unfortunately, we know that globally, access to quality assured medical product remains a challenge. And there is an estimated of 2 billion people that have no access to essential medicine. So effectively shutting them off from the benefit of advance in modern science and medicine. And the reasons are numerous in terms of inadequate or inefficient regulatory capacity, but also we can see that there's a lack maybe sometimes of collaboration and work sharing between the regulators to have a more efficient global regulatory oversight. Next slide, please. So this slide looks at the capacity, the global capacity of regulatory system. So WHO serves 194 member states. And if we look at the level of capacity as of today, we can see that more than 70% of the countries have relatively weak national regulatory systems. So 137 countries cannot really control and authorize and monitor the medical products that enter in their country. We see that it's a minority of countries that have very stable regulatory systems. Next slide, please. So the objective of the WHO regulatory system strengthening programs are twofold. One is to build regulatory capacity in the member states, consistent with the good regulatory practices, which are high-level principles to have an efficient regulatory system to control the medical product in their countries. And the second one is to try to promote regulatory cooperation, convergence, and work sharing and reliance between authorities. Because we can see that the picture is getting better. So we've got more and more countries that are building up their regulatory system. However, we can see that it will take a long time for many regulatory systems to reach maturity level 3, which is the target to have a stable, well-functioning and integrated regulatory system. That is why we think that reliance is a very important tool because we have to facilitate access for those countries with limited regulatory capacity to ensure that we can facilitate access to quality assured medical products. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot and is to explain what happened as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Reliance was really key to facilitate access to the COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics. And there is a link to an article that details a bit more all the different global cooperation that happened. But just to show an example that from the listing on the emergency use listing for WHO to acknowledge the quality, safety, and efficacy of the vaccine, they used the assessment from the European Medicine Agency for the first vaccine that was EUL. And this was done 10 days after the EMA scientific advice, because the WHO worked very closely with the EMA, and EMA opened their decision-making process and the scientific discussion. So there was facilitation and use of the existing evaluation. So WHO didn't duplicate the evaluation, but they used the evaluation from the European Medicine Agency and other areas of reference for other vaccines. But in this specific example, for the first vaccine that was EUL, the area of reference was EMA. The WHO was used also as a reference for in-country authorization in many countries where the vaccines were rolled out. So, for example, for the first rollouts that happened in March 2021, 101 countries gave authorization for use or importation of for use of the product within 15 days of the WHO emergency use listing. So this is a great achievement, because we know that in some countries, it usually takes years or months to get the product approved. So it was great to see that Reliance and the hub of information from WHO could facilitate access to COVID-19 vaccines globally. As highlighted by Janis in her presentation, Reliance can be used for all the regulatory functions, and it's what was done during the pandemic, because Reliance was used not only for authorization, but also in terms of batch release to try to not duplicate the testing of the vaccine and to have quick access to the vaccine, but also for pharmacovigilance, for post-authorization changes. So any change happening after the initial authorization in terms of indication, the pediatric indication, for example, or in terms of adding a manufacturing site, etc. Next slide, please. What is very important as well is for regulators to try to have the same dialogue and to try to work on reaching convergence and harmonization to facilitate the common language for decision making and facilitate cooperation, work sharing, and reliance. So these are all there are a lot of global and regional harmonization activities, and WHO is supporting all of them. In terms of trying to create a common language between regulators to facilitate the submission of medical products across the board. Just to highlight here that some of my colleagues have mentioned, Dr. Rägo has mentioned, some authorities are very advanced in using the patient voice in regulatory oversight and authorization and monitoring, etc. And it's an important topic that is discussed in many of these fora. For example, the International Pharmaceutical Regulatory Program, the IFPMA, it's one of the topics that the regulators discuss in terms of exchanging best practices and experience in terms of involving patients in the decision and also the regulatory oversight of medical products. Next slide, please. So reliance and harmonization, just a big message to say that really it's beneficial for all stakeholders. It facilitates access to quality assured medical products. This may speed up approval timelines. It's an efficient use of available resources to avoid duplication. And one could ask, are we using the resources globally as best as we can currently? And I think the answer is that there is margin for improvement. And I think collectively, we can try to discuss and have some better model and innovative model to better use the global resources, because we know they are lacking. Also, it allows for better submission management for global supply. And we've seen in the case of COVID-19 vaccine and therapeutics that all the work on reliance and harmonization can facilitate access. Next slide, please.
Very sorry, you have to wrap up your presentation.
Yes. So this one is just to mention that, and some of the colleagues have mentioned, there is an important conference that happens every 2 years. It's the International Conference of Drug Regulatory Authorities, and the 19th version will take place in India in June 2024. And it's a very important forum and platform for regulators to exchange and share best practices. And with that, I will move to the next slide, please. Just to thank you for your attention. I will be very happy to take any question. Thanks a lot.
So I think I speak on behalf of the patient leaders who are tuned in globally, leaders from Africa, Asia, and South America, whose countries probably belong to those who have the weakest regulatory agencies. And I was very much struck by Dr. Lembit's comment on the tokenism. So my first question is, what kind of competencies and skills do you think patient representatives in these bodies should have so that it does not become a token participation and there's meaningful participation in these processes?
Thank you. It's not easy to give a very short answer, but the issue is that you need also from patients different experience and expertise. Not all patient representatives have the same experience and expertise. So depending on the topic, you need to see that you have really those patient representatives who are fit for your purpose. And it can differ. It can be differing in terms of, as we have the European Medicines Agency's, process diagram, in which committee, which type of expertise you need, So in certain committees you need more general expertise and experience and voice of patients to be represented. But then if you go to the rare diseases, there is really very specific, unique expertise and experience from patients that even medical doctors sometimes don't have, because it's so rare, and they are there really who have it. So, and then there is another very important element, which is also in our report, and many other parties nowadays share this view, is patients also need education to be fully in capacity to participate meaningfully. And it's not only that the patient need education to work together with other parties, but also other parties need specific education to try to put them better understanding how to work the best together with patient representatives. So it's all the stakeholders need some education and priming to do the best cooperation possible. And that is applicable to patients, it's applicable to the regulators, it's applicable to other governmental officials, academics, whoever is involved, industry people. And I think there is a lot of progress in that. Again, Europe probably is a bit ahead because there is a lot of initiatives of patient education in Europe, but some of these resources can be also nowadays through website used in other regions. But it's a very good question, but I think I stop here. It's due to time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lambert. So one of the things that we also learned is from the European Medicines Agency is the sharing of the journey of patient involvement. And in many parts of the world, we're not even invited yet. So my question to Dr. Maria Mavris is, what advice will you give patient groups to advance adoption of their involvement in their regulatory agencies, for example, to ensure that at least we get invited to these discussions? Over to you, Dr. Maria.
Thank you very much for the question. I think from my perspective, also, I have to say that I worked in a patient organization before joining the European Medicines Agency. And the advice that, as a former person working in a patient organization, is to start to have already a conversation and start a relationship with your regulatory agency. So it's not only happening at times of crisis when there's a shortage, when there's a medicine that's being authorized or not being authorized. And I think it's very important to already start reaching out to your regulatory authority and to start a dialogue with them and let them know what you can bring as a patient organization, what expertise, what experience that you can bring to them, and the added value of interacting with you and the benefits of interacting with your community. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you, Dr. Maria. So my next question now is directed to Janis. So would the industry have capacity building activities and support for patient groups in order that we may be able to participate meaningfully and, get the government to include us and listen to us?
Yes, I mean, at least at the IFPMA level, what we're really trying to do is, as mentioned, is we're learning about regulatory reliance ourselves. We're on a different side of things where the industry is submitting dossiers, working through that process. But I think there's a great opportunity to learn together. And what was mentioned is we're trying to do like a webinar with IAPO as a first step to better explain reliance from our perspective, and also so they understand and they can have that conversation with the National Regulatory Authority as well, and feel like they can reach out. But I think the capacity building for reliance shouldn't just come from us as well. I think there are other organizations like WHO, so the patients get all sides. That's what I would recommend, and we're really trying to, at least foster that as much as we can.
Thank you very much. So I will direct the question now to Marie. In terms of what are your programs to build the capacity of patient leaders to participate in regulatory reliance?
Yes, thanks a lot for the question, and I fully agree with Janis. I think reliance is really a tool from the 21st century, and there's a lot of campaign in terms of we created, for example, a short online that's on open access, and I can send the link in terms of explaining. So it's available in English, in French, and in Spanish, and it explained the higher level principle of reliance and how beneficial it can be for medical regulatory oversight. I think it's very important, and we really acknowledge as we work a lot with the regulators globally, we can highlight the importance of involving patients and listening to patient voice. As we've seen, different countries are at different level of maturity, so it might be difficult for some of the regulators that are building the journey, that are just at the beginning, but I think it doesn't prevent from the start, and I think Maria mentioned, from the EMA when they first started, the patient went to knock on the door, so I think it's very important from the onset to think about patient and involve them in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. Because countries look at WHO to set the tone, so it would also be very helpful that the patient involvement in these processes are also emphasized, and maybe ask them if there's already an existing involvement with the patient groups. Because as you know, we look to WHO in all parts of the world. So do we have time for online questions?
Yes.
Kawaldeep, over to you.
And also as audience for the question. Very good question. I think, Marie, it's a little bit challenging one. It's a combination question. The individual is saying that he lost families to COVID, and he is saying, shouldn't regulatory reliance become part of pandemic preparedness treaty for future pandemics? Meaning that if we have a pandemic in the future, he says we should not be struggling as Marie, I think it's European in it, that when the European Medicines Agency approved some vaccines, but some national governments were not accepting it. Do you think regulatory reliance should become part of parcel of the pandemic preparedness treaty? That's the question coming up first.
Yes, so as you know, thank you very much for the important question. There are different work streams in terms of preparing, and there are a lot of lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemics, and one of them obviously is the pandemic treaty, but also there is some like technical guidance. So we are updating, when in the process of updating the guidance on authorization for pandemic vaccine, and definitely reliance is the way forward and is the way proposed in that guidance in terms of using the lesson learned from COVID-19 and proposing a model where and in the case of COVID-19, for example, WHO was not only used for reliance, but it was a hub as well to provide the information to countries, because we can imagine that no company can submit to 150 countries at the same time, unfortunately. So for COVID-19 vaccine, WHO was used as a hub, and to facilitate provision to the minimum quality, safety, and efficacy information to the authorities, and with the assessment report and inspection report to make their own decision, but to facilitate this work of having access as quickly as possible globally. So yes, definitely it will be part of the lesson learned and the way forwards. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you very much. I think this is also a difficult question for the panel because we do not have an African representative on the panel, but irrespective, the question is, when will the African Medicines Agency be incorporated, and how can African patients engage with the European Medicines Agency's policies and arrangements? So Marie, is there any connection, any third government assistance that EMA has in place so that you can help patients in Africa become part and parcel of the African Medicines Agency when it gets started? Thank you.
Our colleagues in the international affairs at the European Medicines Agency are interacting with the creators of the African Medicines Agency on a very regularly. And I know that we have shared a lot of our documents on the creation of the framework for interaction with patients, also any documents which are also on our public website as well, on the working parties and how we interact with individual patients and patient organizations as well. So we are sharing all of the information that we have available with the African Medicines Agency, but it's still very early stages yet. But certainly at the creation stage of the AMA, they are already looking at interacting with patients and organizations. So this is very much on the table and very much at the forefront. So thank you.
Thank you. This is to Rägo. In which it says, when will WHO Africa implement CIOMS in Africa? Sorry, it's the same person doing the same question.
Well, just I want to mention that in the process of creating this document, about which I was shortly talking, we had a meeting supported by us in Africa, in Uganda, which was bringing the patients together with the regulator, the local regulator. So in certain country levels, the elements are already happening. So it's just to capitalize of some of these things that have happened, like what I mentioned. And it's also in African context, is another thing is, in some countries, patients are somewhat better organized and it's easier. In other countries, it's just the organization of patient organizations is starting. So it's again, in different countries in a different way and speed. But I think elements are already starting there, which is very good to see.
Thank you very much. Karen, if you want to open the question to the audience here,
Yeah.
online is finished.
So I just wanted to follow up your question, Kawaldeep, because I think the European Medicines Agency has really led the way, and the journey of patient involvement is quite impressive. So what's your advice, Dr. Maria, for other patient groups and patient leaders in other regions, including mine? What would your recommendations be on how to create such close working relationships. Of course, I know that you talked about initiating that discussion and getting to know them. But beyond that, is there a need for how do we institutionalize? How do we make it sustainable? Is there a need for a policy within the government agency? Do we need a law? Do we need WHO to weigh in on this? What's your advice?
Okay, this is quite a big question. Thank you for the question. I think I was very interested in what Dr. Rägo just also responded with regard to the organization of the patient how organized the patient organization is as well, and this is very interesting because it's not just on the regulators, but it is also important that the patients do create organizations that look beyond just the support regarding the disease. I think there has to be activity at the policy level. There has to be activity interacting with governments, exactly as you say, to kind of make sure that this is integrated, that patient collaboration and engagement with patients is integrated into the law, as it is with the European regulation as well. We have an article that we rely on quite extensively, that we use quite flexibly to make sure that patients are involved at all levels. So again, I go back to it's important that the organizations themselves are very aware of what's going on at the political level and the policy level. They have to try to make changes. They have to have a voice there, and they have to also be united as well. We have within Europe not only national organizations within the different member states, but we also have representative organizations across Europe, and also like IAPO as well, the International Alliance of Patient Organizations, which is very important that we have these voices that come and join and represent all of the patients and make sure that the voice is common and sharing the same message. So I think that would be the advice that I would give. Again, it's about coordination and about continued, and you have to be persistent as well, because it's not an easy path.
Thank you so much, Marie. I totally agree, because I think many patient groups can be so focused on the disease that they don't see the system level changes that need to happen. And that's why PAPO is very appreciative of IAPO, because we're able to see cross-cutting issues and not just those pertaining to specific diseases. It's certainly important, and as Dr. Lembit said, we need to map out also as patient groups our skills, our competencies, and send the right person to that discussion so that government or the medical societies will not say, oh, they're just here to ask things, but they don't really bring solutions or ideas to the table. And we want to change that. And I appreciate also that you emphasize the need to build our capacity. And we're doing that through congresses like this, through fora, through PAPO now has a partnership with the Asian Institute of Management for Health Leadership and Management, so that we elevate the kind of thinking. So we're into design thinking, we're into many skills building, theory of change. These are things that we need to capacitate our patient leaders so we can sit meaningfully, and people will listen to us, and we will, as you said, add value to the discussion. Any more questions from online?
There's one more. This is actually an invitation to the whole panel. Our African Medicines Agency Treaty Alliance partner and organization in Rwanda has invited everybody to Rwanda when the African Medicines Agency opens its door. The whole panel is invited, by the way. And he says, come participate in the event, opening ceremony, cut the ribbon, but also they'll take us to gorilla watching. So you have your ticket on that. So thank you from him and everybody from Rwanda.
So I see the hand of our board member. Sorry, I saw her hand raised first. BC, yes, over to you, BC.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you. It's been a very interesting session. I'm interested in the question on the African Medicine Agency, the launching, and I want to thank the EMA for the hand of friendship and mentoring hand that they've stretched towards Africa. I just want to encourage them that please, we are really waiting in the wings. We're very anxious to see this come to fruition. The Amata Treaty has been duly signed by the requisite 15 nations as far back as I think about a year ago. So we are really, really very anxious and waiting, and we hope that IAPO will continue to be actively involved even when the agency is launched. Thank you very much. And just to register that Africa is here at this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, BC. We hear you loudly and clearly. Yes?
Hello, I'm Tessa Richards, BMJ. Thank you very much. That was a great session. I'd just like to pick up on something that you were getting at towards the end, Karen, which has struck me for a long time, this concept of patient leadership. You know, I know there's various levels at which you might want to involve patients, just get their experience, but increasingly there are a number with huge expertise and experience, but there is no real hierarchy within patient leadership. I don't know, you know, there's no definition of a patient leadership leader. There is no skills and letters you can have after your name. You know, should there be some more thought given to whether we take this as a discipline, as an academic discipline? And what about, you know, training in health policy making? Because, I mean, you know, health policy makers don't jump onto the table, you know, from nowhere. They've undergone training, understand, you know, how to participate, how to get their voice, who's influential. And it seems to me that patients and patient organizations are left kind of on their own, trying to kind of find a way to catch policymakers' attention, you know. So is there a way we can actually make this a little bit more structured, scientific, dare I say it, academic, you know?
I'm with you there, Tessa, because because of my leadership in PAPO, I've seen leaders who are very passionate, but you can't live on passion alone. You need, as you said, all those skills and competencies, because when you're sitting among doctors, you're sitting among government officials, you need to be able to discuss intelligently. And would you believe that even the basic understanding of the healthcare system is very much lacking? So don't be surprised when patients ask and demand for this and that, because they don't understand how the system works. And that's the reason why I agree that there might be you know, be a way to sort of say that, oh, this patient leader has these skills. I know that UPATI has a program that's very structured, and I don't know if that's something that we can adopt in our own regions, because at least if you're able to be equipped with those courses, with that fellowship, then you can confidently say, because remember, patients are people with jobs, and unfortunately for many, they lose their jobs as well, or their carers. So, you know, we come from different backgrounds, different, I don't know, different experiences. Yes.
Yeah, may I share a little bit?
Yes,
yeah.
Arajit. Arajit is our board member from Thailand.
Yeah. And I'm also from Heart to Heart Foundation, Thailand, and we are patient advocate organization. And I can share a little bit, and I see that is very useful, and it's also useful for my work. And right now, what I would like to say is in Thailand now, since we have the Patient Organization Alliance Forum also, so it's what I would like to say is the systematic strategy and also some mechanism that organized by the patient organize themselves, and they work with the government, mainly with the National Health Security Office. So any regulation, any benefit package, they will talk in this patient organization forum or alliance, and they work together. But this forum is free, independent from the government, and they can discuss among themselves, and then when they have the solution, they can talk with the government, and this some kind of systematic and collaboration. And this forum, they will have meeting twice a month, twice a time, and it's work well. Even the maybe talk about patient safety issue, or even benefit package issue, policy advocacy, they can talk here, and they work. Not mean that you just ask the patient to join us, and then they're not organized and don't know what to talk, no voice also, something like that.
Yes, Yupati,
Hello,
fellow.
yes,
Please share.
Is this on? Yes. My name is Estelle. I'm a UParty fellow, and I'm really happy to hear how much UParty has been mentioned here. There are other training opportunities, of course, but it's great to have this visibility and to hear that, maybe we'll spread around the world. So I wanted to say two things. First of all, that CIOMS report is absolutely amazing. It's like my Bible. I keep it on my desk. So I really recommend it to everybody, and it's a fantastic searchable tool as well. That's the one thing for everybody. It's, around the world. And then, the other thing I wanted to say is to just bring this back to us. Every patient was once a person who was alone and scared and got a diagnosis and didn't understand the word and didn't know what to do. And, with support, first of all, from other patients, we, evolve. So I think this is something, I don't want to put the ball back completely in the court of patients, but all of us as patients, we have a responsibility to look for the next generation, to look for the young ones who are finding their way, for the ones who are scared, and give them a hand and show them what there is, what they can do, what resources are available, because a little bit of nurturing can go a really long way in an individual. So we have that responsibility, and it's easy to be involved in high-level things and sort of forget that connection. It's very important. And also for the point of diversity, I am a UParty fellow, and I must say in our group, it's not very diverse. It's geographically diverse, but it's not diverse in terms of race and country of origin in that way. So we also have that responsibility to stop and say, hang on, is there somebody here I can bring in and give them a place? And that's something we must really keep in mind.
Thank you very much. Just to answer that, because of we come from the same continent, you'll be surprised. We are both Africans, so South African. I'm from East Africa. We're both interested in this, and just to reassure everybody, we have Professor Amani, who is from the women's pharmacy professor in Al-Azhar University in Egypt, who's also the chair of the African Pan-African Universities group, and also the president of the African Union University. So she and I have been talking on this, that we will be tying up soon, hopefully, with UParty to have UParty in that African Union base. We're educating patients on the African Medicines Agency, but we were waiting for the African Medicines to open its door. So that's it. Thank you. One more.
Last question.
Hi there.
Then the coffee waits you. Yeah, please.
And so I'm just preface that I may be dangerously naive here. My name is Kat. I do communications for a global health nonprofit, and we work in sub-Saharan Africa. And so this is a very interesting conversation because we're working on changing the model, if you will, shifting it to look at patient-centered care, and actually working to shift the health system in low and mid-income countries, obviously. So in doing communications, one of the things that I'm doing is bringing a voice to the voiceless, to communities and in these regions. And so when I'm hearing, especially as a storyteller, about how patient leaders need to be maybe perhaps trained to learn to speak to systems, for me, as a storyteller, I kind of have this reaction to that, because maybe sometimes it's these voices that speak very simply that need to be heard, who maybe don't need to understand the system, but maybe we should be learning from them. And so I think the vernacular, while it sounds different, maybe the simplicity in these voices, maybe we don't actually have to listen to and speak the same language, but that simplicity in language should be listened to. So I don't know if I misunderstood the comment, but if we're interfacing with someone who has simple language and doesn't understand the system, I don't think that that's so bad. So maybe if we can clarify that a little bit, or maybe there's something that I missed in that. So does that question make sense?
I'll answer that simply because I've been working with the WHO's global framework of patient engagement in NCDs. Please have a look. It was open a week before we met here. That's this precise issue we have put in there. This is, Rägo will agree on that, that's why CIOMS brought us into it, that lived experience is expertise in its own right, in that, especially with NCDs. You're a professor of medicine who might not have done less than half a unit of some rare disease, where the patient is a super professor. They've lived 20 years with it. So we are doing that. And please do keep in touch with us. We have got the WHO's Global Patient Safety Action Plan, and World Patient Safety Day is looking for such stories, those simple narratives of what went wrong, but what went right as well. So thank you. I'm so glad you're here. Karen, we can break for
Thank
coffee.
you. Thank you. I'd just like to clarify. Obviously, we don't diminish the patient voice. We don't diminish the experiences. What I'm trying to say is that we can also participate in the policy discussion, and that's a bit more technical than the patient experience. So we don't need to cancel out the patient voice. We just need patient voices that look at systemic changes that need to be done. And I think for that, there's a different competency that's needed. Thank you. All right, so with that, we'd like to thank our distinguished panel and everyone who contributed to this wonderful discussion. And so thank you very much, Kawaldi, and to our speakers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Sorry,
Have a good day.
Thank you very much, online viewers and everybody. Do have your coffee back. Please have a short coffee break, and let's be back here within the 10 minutes or so. Thank you. Thank you. The coffee is ready out there, so I know that will wake us up. Thank you.
Hello. I'll give you my card as well, so you can help us.